Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we will be watching bad storytime animations. It is my favorite content. So, let's watch it. Number 1. I'm 18 and have a 6-year-old son. Share my story. Short stories. Hold up, I just want to say the comments on this. What? That's great. Okay, let's watch this.
As a freshman at primary school. I know this sounds crazy as I'm only 18. I'm going to tell you how it happened. My parents are business owners. They work very hard, and because of this, when I was younger, they got older kids to look after me. I missed my parents, but I understood how important their work was to them. Still, having the neighbor's 16-year-old daughter looking after me was kind of annoying.
Does this kid not understand what babysitting is? Does he not understand the concept of babysitting? It's gonna be a long one.
She would play loud music, invite her friends over, and eat all the snacks. When I was 11, I insisted that I didn't need a childminder anymore, and I was old enough to look after myself. They told me that I wasn't old enough yet, but they understood why I didn't want the neighbor and other teenagers babysitting me anymore. So they hired Eleanor, the nanny. She was in her 20s, polite, kind, and made the most amazing cookies. My parents instantly thought she was great, and to begin with, so did I. It was the little things that happened at first, like when she'd give me lingering looks and say things to me like, "Kyle, you're so grown up." Soon she was making me get changed in front of her. Then she made me keep my clothes off.
Has this kid never undergone child predator safety training?
Altogether. She forced me to watch adult videos, which I didn't properly understand. When I got upset, she'd tell me that I was being a baby and that she'd got me wrong and I must be very immature and childish. I hated what she was doing, but the thought of her thinking I was a baby upset me. I now know that she knew exactly what to say and do to manipulate me, but at the time, I was just a kid and I didn't understand what she was doing. What Eleanor did grew worse, and she began to touch me inappropriately and make me do things that I didn't want.
I love how this kid knew it was wrong and he said he knew it was wrong, but he just went along with it anyways, like,
to do. She told me that she was sick and that if I did these things, she would be healed. I became more and more withdrawn and angry at the world, but my parents just thought it was my age. Eleanor became pregnant and left. My parents thought that her boyfriend had got her pregnant. Eleanor kept in touch with them, and sometimes they sent her gifts and a little bit of money, which I found out later was because they felt sorry for her. This doesn't surprise me, as Eleanor was the queen of manipulation. I almost forgot everything about her until one day when I took part in a gender and social class at school. That's when I realized that I'd been abused. At first, I was completely shocked. I felt so sick when I thought about what happened, and I also felt angry. For the next few months, I was pretty horrible to be around. I shouted at my friend, said vile things to my parents, and ended up with a total of 5 detentions. My parents sat me down and demanded to know why I was acting so completely out of character. In the end, I decided that I couldn't let this eat me up anymore. So I told them the truth about Eleanor and what she'd made me do. My parents were shocked, and my mom started crying. After talking about it, they decided to call Eleanor around. They told her it was for a catch-up. When she arrived, they confronted her about what she'd done to me. But of course, she denied it. My mom walked out of the room in tears, and my dad went to comfort her. That's when I went into the room and came face to face with Eleanor. At first, she was her usual charming self, but soon her personality changed, and she turned vicious. She told me that if I carried on blaming her, she would make out that I assaulted her and land me in trouble, and that I just had to accept what she'd done to me and move on.
This kid said he learned about child predators. Shouldn't he know that they do that? Like, come on now. Did they not teach him that?
Dad appeared and hurried me out of the room and made Eleanor leave our house. That's when I pulled my phone out of my pocket and told my parents that I'd recorded everything. We took the recording to the police and played it to them. A DNA test was carried out, and it turns out that the baby was actually mine. Eleanor was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I knew that she could be out after 10 years, and that does scare me, as I don't want her coming anywhere near my son. Although finding out I have a son was a massive shock, Stanley is my world, and I want to provide the best life I can for him, regardless of who his mother is. My parents helped me raise him. They've been really supportive and amazing. I don't blame them for what happened, as Eleanor fooled us all. Every day, I drop Stanley off at school before I go to classes. The other kids know that I have a kid, and some of them say stuff about it behind my back. This used to upset me, but it doesn't anymore because they don't matter. What does matter is the fact that I have amazing friends who support me, great parents, and a truly awesome son. Life doesn't always plan out the way we expect it, but great things can grow out of the darkness. I love Stanley, and I want to be the best dad I can to him. After all, none of this is his fault. I know what happened to me was really bad, and I truly believe that there are more good people in the world than bad. If something bad has happened to you and you...
The issue with these animation channels is they're so fake. Like, so fake. Like, it'd be believable, but, like, there's no way. It would have been all over the news, and it isn't. And why would you go to this crappy channel to share it? That was our first animation. This one should be good. Let's watch.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I have a big confession to make.
Karen. Karen. Of course Karen would add female pills to his dad food.
I might have given pills to my dad to make him look more like a woman. Well, in fact, I definitely did. I know it's messed up, but desperate times call for drastic measures. I don't regret my decision, but I have stopped doing it. After all, my plan worked to perfection, and there was no need for him to take the pills any longer. Let me tell you all about how my dad became very feminine for a long time. I was amazed the pills worked so well because he really did look like a masculine woman. Well, let me start by saying that my mom is awesome, and my dad made the biggest mistake of his life by divorcing her. She is an amazing, intelligent, and sweet woman. But Dad wanted to be with younger women. Imagine how annoyed I was at that. Dad gave up his family just to behave like a guy half his age. I wish Dad could be more mature. Now, I have to admit, my father isn't a bad guy. He just makes terrible decisions and tends to decide things on whims. This makes him very impulsive, and he ends up messing up more often than not. He clearly loves me and has raised me well, but as a guy, he's kind of messed up. He wasn't nice at all during the divorce procedures, and so I sort of believed he had some punishment coming. Still, I decided not to jump into action just yet. Maybe Dad would come to his senses, and then he'd go back to Mom. Instead, he got himself the craziest girlfriend in the world. She was mean, annoying, and entitled, but she was hot. That was all my dad saw in her, and she had him wrapped around her little finger. It was so sad. Dad drooled whenever she was around. He was a middle-aged guy letting a girl barely 10 years older than I make every decision for him. I mean, if that was just affecting my dad, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten involved, but it affected me as well. You see, Mom worked long hours. She couldn't take care of me as often as she'd like to. So when Mom and Dad divorced, it was decided that I should go live with my dad instead. I was not happy. I argued that I'd rather be with my mother, but they talked to me and
if she says her dad is that bad, then wouldn't the judge rule in her mom's favor? Like, seriously?
let me know it was best for me to stay with Dad. Mom promised me we'd still spend a lot of time together, and I'd go to her place often, but I'd be living most of the week at my father's house. I got incredibly upset. Mom explained that she worked such long hours, and she didn't like the idea of having me be all on my own all that time. So it was better if, for the time being, I lived with Dad full time. Look, this sounds mean. I know Dad loves me, and I love him. I like spending time with him, but I didn't want to be around him all the time. He was very impulsive, as I said, and his girlfriend was such a mess. I hated Missy, and I know she hated me as well, or at least she really, really didn't like me. Having a teenager at her place was so annoying to her because she didn't get to do whatever she wanted. Missy was so entitled, and oh yes, she began living with my dad like 2 months after the divorce was final. Talk about convenience. You see, Dad is quite wealthy, and Missy had a way of getting him to buy her everything she wanted. It was super annoying, and I would tell my dad that he shouldn't be spending this money on her. Of course, he took her side and said he liked pampering her. I rolled my eyes and shrugged, but I still wasn't happy about her. Missy and I would get into these big arguments, yelling matches almost, like we were sisters or something. She was older than me, but she behaved like a stubborn princess and got annoyed about everything I did. She began acting like a totally evil stepmom, bossing me around as if she had any right to tell me what to do. She liked the power, I think, but of course, I wasn't having it. Every time she told me what to do, I just closed the door to my room and ignored her, or began arguing with her and reminding Missy that this was my dad's house, not hers. Dad was, understandably, not happy about his daughter and his girlfriend fighting all the time, but he refused to take sides. He didn't want either of us to get mad at him, which was super annoying, as you can imagine. Missy was very reckless and juvenile, and she didn't even have a job. She didn't care about me at all and only paid attention to me when she wanted to scold me. I eventually had enough and decided to talk to my dad again about Missy. I told him that I just didn't get along with his girlfriend, and having to live under the same roof as she was a complete hell. I explained that she made me feel uncomfortable in my own home and wanted nothing to do with her. If he wanted to keep dating her, she could find a place of her own, or I could move back with my mom. Dad asked me to be a bit more patient and try to get along with her. He explained that she was a nice girl and I should try to give her a chance. He told me that he would speak with her and try to get Missy to be nicer to me. Dad promised that with a bit more time, it would get better, and we would get along far better. I begrudgingly agreed and tried so hard to give Missy a chance, but it only got worse and worse. Plus, Dad was nasty to my mom whenever they had to talk to each other, so I finally had enough. It was time to get Missy to break up with my dad and teach him a lesson in the process. It took me some time to come up with a good plan, but eventually,
Why does it look like she has a mustache? Like, right below her nose, it just looks like she has a mustache. Oh, these animations.
it came to me. Missy was incredibly shallow, and she would never date a guy who she would be embarrassed to be seen with, no matter how much money he had. So I needed to make my dad look like someone she'd be ashamed to date. Now, how could I get that done? I couldn't make him gain weight without him realizing something was wrong and simply changing his diet. So it needed to be something I could slip into his food without him noticing.
Imagine thinking, okay, so my dad's dating a chick and I don't like, okay? So, we need to get them to break up. I've tried talking to my dad, okay. Should we try talking to him again? No. Let's drug him with female testosterone pills.
Suddenly, an idea came to me. What if I gave my dad female hormones?
Imagine being like the Albert Einstein of giving people female hormones. Ugh. Oh my god, that makes me want to die. Like, legit. Like, this girl has some issues. Like, just talk it out and keep talking to your dad. He'll eventually realize. You just keep talking to him. No. Let's give him female hormones. That's right. Big brain.
And got him to look more like a woman. Then he wouldn't realize why it was happening and would be unable to stop it from happening. How could he guess that his own daughter was slipping pills into his food to get him to look
Who could guess that their own blood would drug them because they're not happy with their girlfriend?
more feminine? Getting the pills was far easier than you might imagine. I had a friend whose older brother was going through a gender change himself. He knew someone who could get me exactly what I needed. It wasn't cheap, but I had been saving my allowance for a long time, and I decided it was a worthy investment. It would allow me to shoot 2 birds with 1 stone. First, I would finally get rid of Missy. Second, I would get my dad to realize that looks weren't everything. I was going to punish him for the way he dumped my mom for a girl half his age and finally have some peace and quiet at my own house. Now, you might think what I did was wrong, but believe me, this woman was too annoying to deal
God, it's just like, oh, she annoyed me. She annoyed me a little too much. Let's drug my dad.
with any longer. And Dad kind of had it coming, so I really don't regret it at all. I knew that the process would be long, but I was ready to wait. After all, in time, Missy would dump Dad and everything would be fine. Every single day, I added pills to Dad's meal. I would ground the little white capsules and then mix the food so that he couldn't tell the difference. They tasted like nothing, so it was impossible to feel the difference unless he actually saw me doing it. Dad thought I was being super helpful and sweet by cooking for him so often, and he raised my allowance. He didn't know that this was helping me buy the pills I was using to punish him and get rid of his girlfriend.
Not the fact she's using punish, because drug isn't a good word.
And once and for all. My plan worked like a charm.
If anything, she's more shallow, because she's shallow enough to not realize that, oh hey, I could just be a little bit more accepting and wait a few years until I'm old enough to move. But no.
Took a few weeks, but eventually Dad's features began to change. I had to stop myself from giggling and telling Dad that he looked like a girl. I just acted surprised whenever he asked us if we noticed something different about him. His features were gentler and he didn't grow facial hair so easily. Also, he had to get haircuts far more often because it was growing at an alarming rate. He even began growing female parts on his chest, and most of the shirts he used to wear didn't fit him right any longer. Of course, Missy freaked out and told him he had to do something about it. Dad went to the doctors, but they couldn't understand why his appearance was changing like that. They ran some tests and discovered the extra estrogen in his blood, but no one could explain why this was happening. They gave him some pills to balance this problem out, but I would change them for the female pills instead. That made the change happen faster and faster. Plus, it was so much easier to get him to take the pills daily since he was doing it by himself to try and fix the problem. His jaw seemed more delicate and his body rounded. Dad wasn't a manly man any longer, and even his mood was more feminine and delicate. It was hilarious. I was so happy that Dad finally had his comeuppance and that Missy seemed so annoyed all the time. It was clear that there was trouble in paradise. Dad and Missy weren't getting along at all, and she constantly told him to solve the issue of his appearance. Dad tried everything, including silly so-called miracle cures, but of course, none worked. Whatever he tried taking, I would always replace it with the estrogen pills. Eventually, Missy told my dad that she didn't want to be seen with a guy who looked like a woman.
If you look, you can see his original hairline. You can see where it was, and then they just like added stuff. Like they didn't even bother changing the line.
Screamed like a madwoman and ended up breaking up with him. I couldn't believe how well my plan had worked. Imagine how happy I was when Missy packed up her stuff and left. My dad's
Imagine like making your dad depressed and ruining his whole life because you didn't like his girlfriend. So you literally ruined his life.
annoying girlfriend was finally out of my life, and I didn't have to deal with her any longer. After that finally happened, I decided Dad had suffered enough. I stopped giving him the pills. Little by little, he's going back to normal. He is so confused and doesn't understand what managed to finally solve his problem, but he's clearly very relieved. I hope Dad doesn't get himself another crazy girlfriend. If he does, though, I have a
That animation literally made me want to die. Why would that exist? Let's find one more video. I'm the only male at a sleepover. No. Let's think. Let's think here. Did I get blessed by the fish god? What? What is this? What is this? Hashtag.
Okay, class, who would like to do problem 3 on the board? Please don't be me.
Nobody.
I woke up in the middle of the night with shooting pains going through my stomach. I thought maybe I'd eaten something bad, so I ran to the bathroom expecting to throw up any minute. But nothing happened. I was 15 years old and I hadn't had my period in over 2 months. So when I told my mom about the pains, she said maybe I was pregnant. I was shocked. Firstly, because I've never even had a boyfriend, and secondly, because
No, I got blessed by the fish god.
that'd be impossible, right? It's really annoying because I love going to the beach. I live in a fishing village in the Philippines, and I usually spend every weekend swimming, but when my stomach started getting bigger, I was freaked out and couldn't stop thinking that maybe I really was pregnant. My grandma noticed that my stomach was getting bigger and told me there was a legend in our village that if you go swimming during your period, you would get blessed by the fish god, and then you'd fall pregnant. She said everyone knew about the legend of the fish god and that I needed to be more careful. When she told me this, I just stared at her in shock. I actually did go swimming with my friend Jasmine once when I was on my period. Oh my gosh. And I remember having a weird stomachache right afterwards.
Yeah, it happens. It happens while you're swimming. Imagine making such dumb correlations.
No way! I ran to Jasmine's house and told her I was pregnant and that the father was a fish. At first, she just laughed, but then she said her grandma had told her this legend before too. That's why she never swam on her period. I was so annoyed with her. Why hadn't she told me this?
Probably because it wouldn't be something to bring up during a normal conversation. Like you're just sitting there and then your friend's like, oh hey, so today my grandma told me this legend about fish gods and pregnancy. Like when would that come up?
She knew I'd been on my period that day and she just let me swim? I hadn't been careful when I'd been telling Jasmine, and a boy from our school had overheard me. You can imagine how quickly the rumors spread. And soon, everyone was talking about how a fish had got me pregnant. It made me
Fishing village. What's with all the houses and the people?
sound like some kind of freak, and people actually started turning up at our house to see if the legend of the fish god was true. There was even an old lady who waited outside our door all night so she could be the first one to see it. When I opened the door, she reached out to touch my stomach and said it would heal her eyesight. I felt so bad for her. I let her hold my stomach, even though I felt like a crazy person. Meanwhile, as the days went by, my stomach pains were getting worse and worse. So my mom took me to see a local doctor. He almost fell off his chair when my mom explained that I might be pregnant because of a fish. Sorry, what? He said. He didn't look impressed at all and said that that was some crazy old wives' tale
Finally, some guy that'll actually talk some sense.
and that there was absolutely no way I could be pregnant with a fish. Then he advised me to go to the hospital to run some tests, in case it was something more serious. I felt so embarrassed. Obviously, I wasn't pregnant. How could I have been so stupid to believe the legend? And yet, at the hospital, they did an ultrasound on my stomach, and I swear I saw a fish inside me. My heart dropped. The doctor was busy talking to my mom in another room. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I had stared at the screen the whole time, and there was 100% a fish inside me. I could even see a face. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone and texted Jasmine and told her that
Imagine like seeing what you think of is a fish in your body. You're like, I gotta tell my friend right now. Beep boop.
there was seriously a fish growing inside me. I told her maybe a little fish had swum inside me that day we'd gone swimming, or maybe a fish egg had somehow got inside and now it was growing.
That can't happen. It can't happen. The genes are too different. And also, it wouldn't be a fish egg.
She asked me to bring the scan as proof as she didn't believe me. Now,
I wonder why she didn't believe her.
I was really panicking. This was serious. I didn't say a word to my mom until we were on our way home. I told her what I'd seen, and she looked at me all confused and told me there wasn't a fish inside me and to calm down. Then she said we'd talk about it properly at home. As soon as we got home, Jasmine was waiting for me and we went to my room. I showed her the printout of the ultrasound scan that I had stolen from the medical records in my mom's bag, and she gasped. "You legit have a fish growing inside you," she said. I wanted to cry. So it wasn't just
Imagine having your mom tell you it's not a fish and your friend comes over and is like, it's a fish, and you believe your friend over your mom.
my imagination. This thing was real. After a while of panicking, my mom asked Jasmine to go home so we could talk as a family. We all sat down and my mom explained that although it looked like a fish inside me, it was in fact an ovarian cyst. Now, to me, cysts meant something bad. I burst into tears, thinking I had cancer or something, but my mom assured me I'd be okay. I'm now getting regular checkups to make sure the cyst doesn't do any permanent damage, and hopefully we'll save up enough money soon so that I can have surgery to completely remove it. I still look like I'm pregnant though, because the cyst is quite big, and so my stomach looks really bloated. It's kind of funny in a way. I'm now a bit of a celeb around our village. People call me the girl who fell pregnant with a fish, and there are still random people who turn up at our door asking to see the ultrasound scan of the fish. In a way, it's good because there are people who are willing to help and are giving us money so I can save up for the surgery. Fingers crossed, it'll be removed soon and I can go back to being a normal teenager.
What was that? Please explain to me what that was. Anyways, that'll do it for today, boys. Daily upload number 3. I'll talk to you later, okay? Bye-bye.